Leo hadn't smelled blood and sweat in exactly 16 years, but as he stared at the crumpled piece of paper in his rough palm today, that foul scent flooded his senses. The echoes of his morning argument with his daughter, Maya, still lingered in the empty, spacious living room. "You always tell me to keep my head down," Maya had yelled, grabbing her backpack. "Do you even know how much Jackson and his crew bully me at school? Why do we always have to be so weak, Dad?" Watching his daughter's back as she ran out of the house in tears, Leo could do nothing but sigh. 16 years ago, on a hospital bed, he had promised his wife, Elena, as she took her final breaths, "Give up the old way of solving things with your fists, Leo. Let our little girl grow up in peace." From that day on, he buried the name of the famous UFC champion, the Butcher, and lived quietly as a humble auto repairman. He devoted his time to his daughter, swallowed his pride, and responded to people's condescension with only a smile. But now, everything had changed. A message on his phone shattered his peaceful world. "If you want your daughter back alive, come to the old warehouse at Pier 47. If you call the cops, you'll only find her corpse." Leo opened an old, dusty box in the basement. He pulled out a neatly folded pair of old hand wraps and tightly bound them around his wrists. When he looked at his reflection in the mirror, the eyes of a gentle father were replaced by the ruthless glare of a hunting lion. In the pouring rain of a Seattle night, Leo's footsteps moved silently toward the abandoned warehouse. The cold ocean breeze carried the scent of rusting metal into his nose. His movements to silently take down the two thugs guarding the entrance by pressing their neck veins were not the least bit dulled, despite a 16-year hiatus. With the sound of crunching bones and choked breaths, the two men dropped to the ground without a sound. Adrenaline boiled in his veins. As he ventured deeper into the warehouse under the dim light, he saw Maya tied to a chair. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, and her eyes were wide with terror. Standing next to her was Jackson, the boy who constantly bullied her at school. However, Jackson's demeanor wasn't that of a typical high school bully. Seeing Leo, he flashed a mocking smirk. In the shadows behind Jackson, a large silhouette limped forward with a heavy gait. "Let my daughter go. I will let you walk away peacefully." Leo's voice was steady, but it vibrated with suppressed rage. "Peacefully?" The older man, leaning heavily on a cane, let out a mocking laugh. As he stepped into the light, Leo saw a massive scar across the man's face. "You've lived peacefully for 16 years, Leo, but my son, Jackson, grew up watching his father crawl like a cripple every single day." Leo's fists tightened. Jackson grabbed Maya by the hair, glaring at Leo. "This girl thinks I'm weak. She doesn't even know what kind of ruthless murderer her father used to be. It's time to show the daughter who her father really is." Leo unconsciously rubbed the old scar on his right fist. He realized that this was not a simple kidnapping. 5 thugs emerged from the shadows and rushed at Leo simultaneously. Leo grabbed the arm of the first man who reached him, twisted his body, and threw him through the air. He countered the second man with a devastating knee strike straight to the jaw. Every movement was precise and brutal. The ruthlessness of the Butcher, who once struck fear into the UFC octagon, had fully awakened. A knife grazed Leo's shoulder, tearing the skin, but he didn't care. Despite the blood, sweat, and a few cuts on his face, the drive to save Maya refused to let him feel the pain. Once he subdued the final thug into silence with his signature submission chokehold, the entire warehouse fell dead quiet. Stepping over the groaning men on the floor, Leo walked slowly toward Jackson and the older man. The wail of police sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. Leo grabbed the older man by the collar and slammed him against the wall. His blood-stained fist rose into the air. However, Leo gritted his teeth, and instead of landing on the man's face, the fist smashed violently into the concrete wall next to his head. I'm not the old Leo anymore, Victor. I am a father, Leo said, then rushed to Maya and untied her. Maya held her father tightly, crying in shock and terror. Collapsed on the floor, Victor laughed through his pain and revealed the dark secret of the past. Your daughter thinks the bullying was just a normal teenage high school problem, but Jackson chose her on purpose. 16 years ago, while Elena was in the hospital giving birth, do you remember the night you permanently broke my spine in the UFC octagon, Leo? You didn't quit fighting because your wife died. You hid and ran away because of the guilt of destroying my entire life. At those words, Maya's cries stopped, her eyes widening as she looked up at her father in disbelief. She finally understood that the school bullying and the kidnapping were not coincidences, but part of a massive revenge plot stemming from her father's brutal victory 16 years ago. Leo's humble life wasn't born out of weakness, but out of the deep remorse of having ruined another person's life. As the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the outside of the warehouse and officers swarmed in, Leo wiped away his daughter's tears and held her hand tightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's all over now." It was time to face the dark shadow of the past, but this time he stood firmly, not as the ruthless butcher of the ring, but as a reborn father, bravely confronting his history to protect his daughter.